Is that a new camera? I wonder about, there was a guy at the luncheon the other day, and he was walking around with his camera the whole time, and I'll bet he was really tired.
It can get tired.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hello, Alice.
Hi, Vernon.
This is what? Alice is Alice Bates, and we're talking in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Wednesday, May the 8th. And I appreciate being here and talking with you. You're talking with me. And I'd like for you to tell me about I understand you had a gay son.
That's right. David Wilder. And I don't know exactly where you want me to start, but I think I would like to start back to when I really realized that he was gay. He was different from my other boys as a little boy, and loved him very much. He was a real entertainer, and took piano lessons and danced, and danced with a Jewish organization here in town, and they called him Their David due to their religious beliefs. And he was really a neat young man. And when he finally decided that he could discuss it with me, he came in one evening and sat down on the bed with me and said, "Mom, I have something I want to discuss with you." And he said, "Do you think you can handle it?" And I knew that he was going to tell me that he was gay, and he did. And
About how old was he?
he was 15, just barely 15. And I guess I had a different reaction than most parents have to something like that, because my thoughts were, he loves me, he respects me, he trusts me, because he could tell me at age 15, which I didn't know at the time, but found out later that that was when lots of young men and women get kicked out of their homes because their parents just cannot conceive of having a gay daughter or a gay son. And I kind of floated around up on the clouds for a while, thinking how wonderful it was that he trusted me, that he loved me. And then finally I began to think, of all the things that he wouldn't have that I had wished for him. And so I talked to him about it, and he said, "Mom," he said, "I know you always thought it was neat to have 5 kids, but I've always thought you were just a little bit crazy to enjoy it so much." And so from there on, I did some reorganization of my thoughts, and I asked him not to talk about it with his dad at that time, because his dad was very sick. And so nothing more was said about it. I knew that he had gay companions, and I knew that he was doing all right and he was happy. And he apparently didn't have the problems that lots of gay people have, because he was, if he did, I didn't ever know about it. He went on to college, and everything seemed to be fine with him. And I knew he had a lover. I knew Paul, and was really intrigued with Paul, and was appreciative of their relationship with each other. So stop. I think maybe one of the reasons that I didn't worry as much about David as apparently a lot of other parents worried about their gay children was the fact that David had so many friends, both straight and gay. He was dating a young lady here when he was in his sophomore in high school, that he dated all the way through her. She was ready for her 3rd year in college. And then she got another boyfriend. She knew that David was gay, and David always made a real good-looking date and a safe date. Uh, but he, I asked him one time. I said, "Well, David, have you tried the other way of having sex?" And he said, "Oh," he just nearly died laughing. And he said, "Mom," he said, "I'll bet I'm the only kid in Tulsa that's 16 years old whose mother said, if you tried it the other way, you might like it." So anyway, David was always upfront with me about things, and he was just such a pleasure to be with that I guess that was why I never worried about him. And if he did have problems, I didn't ever know about it. Um, his dad was getting very, very sick, and he eventually died of leukemia. But I decided that I had not discussed it with his dad. I felt like I needed to know where Bernie stood on this before he died, and we knew that his time was limited. So we were on our way to Oklahoma City. Bernie had gotten one day out of the hospital so that we could go to Oklahoma City to see David act in a play at OCU. And on the way down, I decided this was a good time to talk about it. And I said, "Bernie, have you thought that maybe David might be gay?" And he gave me this rather strange look and said, "Well, I'm sure he's gay. Don't you know that he's gay?" And I said, "Well, yes, I did." And I said, "What do you think we should do about it?" And he said, "I don't believe there's anything we can do about it." And we rode a little ways further, and he said, "Does this make any difference in the way you love him?" And I said, "No, it doesn't to me." And he said, "Well, it doesn't to me, so therefore I don't think this needs to be our total discussion, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." And we watched him perform, and quite frankly, we were both so proud that we probably didn't have any buttons left on our shirts, because he was just such a neat young man. He lived with his lover for several years that he was in college. In fact, about 5.5 years they were together. And for some reason that I do know about, but they broke up, and they went their separate ways, but remained friends. And he graduated. His dad died in '81, and David graduated 2 years later from college and went to New York City, where he worked with a paper that provided actors and actresses for stage. They got calls for getting people to come back to the stage, and they worked with people like that, which was, of course, right down David's alley, and he thoroughly enjoyed his work there. I met him several times in New York, and met him several times with groups of friends of his, and got to be kind of mother to everybody out there, and was real flattered with their love that they showed for me. David was asked to write an article for the magazine that they produced in regard to how to treat gay people and people with AIDS, HIV, AIDS in the workplace. And so he did, and the article was published and was a real informative article. So when he discovered in '88 that he was, well, actually he'd come home for his 10th year high school reunion, and was quite the talk of the reunion because he had let his hair grow real long and went to the first party that they had with his hair hanging down his back, and then went to the barber here and had it braided and cut off. And so the next night he went in formal wear with his hair braided and hanging down from his collar to be his tie. He was sort of known as Rip Van Winkle because they thought he had slept all these years and was just finally coming awake. He went back from here sick, landed in New York, and went immediately to the hospital. And I had left, when he left, we had left to go to the West Coast. And I couldn't get a hold of him. I kept calling him, and finally called my daughter and here in Tulsa, and she said that David had something he wanted to tell me, but he didn't want to tell her, and we both immediately said, do you suppose he has AIDS? And that was what he was calling about. And he was had been in the hospital for 3 weeks with pneumocystic pneumonia, and was back out and was getting ready to go back to work. Some of the funny experiences he had was he called one day and wanted to know if I would please call a friend of his mother who lives here in Tulsa, because David had shingles and had been told that somebody could get measles from shingles. And so I called the mother, and she said, oh my goodness, no, he's had measles, all different kinds of measles as he was growing up. So I called and told David that, yeah, it would be all right for them to get together probably. They got together, and sure enough, even though he had had measles, his friend got the measles. And then David couldn't go see him because he was afraid that he might get shingles back. So it was kind of a funny time in their life, and they did a lot of kidding about giving each other the measles. And I can't, I guess I went to New York. I was in New York several times and visited with David and had a good time. Even though he looked bad, he was getting very thin. And got a call from my son in on just before the 4th of July of 90. And he said, Mom, I think you need to come because David is really sick. And so I went to New York and stayed with David in the hospital, and he was just real thin. He was never really a heavy child, but he'd lost an awful lot of weight, and was really, the doctor said they didn't expect him to live more than about 2 weeks. So I knew that my daughter was coming to be with him for a while, and so I rushed home to get things prepared to go back to New York. And I got a phone call from David the evening of 4th of July, and he said, guess where I am? And he sounded 100% better, and I said, I have no idea. And he said, I'm up on top I said, no, I did have an idea because he'd been pestering the doctor. And I said, I bet you're up on the roof of the hospital watching the fireworks. And he said, well, you're close, but I'm up on the top of Joe's apartment watching the fireworks. And he said, I want to come home. And I said, well, that would be really great. And then he said, Mom, I want to come home, but I don't want you to tell anybody that I'm dying of leukemia like Dad did. He said, I want you to tell people if they ask that I have AIDS. He said, I think people need to know that nice people have AIDS. And they loved me when I was little. They called me back to play the piano for them. They asked me to do things at the church, and so I want people to know that I do have AIDS, that nice people get AIDS. And so he said, "Do you think you can handle this?" Which got to be his favorite statement to me. "Mom, can you handle that?" And I said, "Well, I certainly will do the best job I can. I've never done something like that before, but I'll bet between us we can handle it." And so on the 27th of July, he came home, and that was in 1990. And when he came home, he was terribly weak, and he stayed here at the house with us, and we had some very frightening experiences with the hospital. But we were fortunate in that somebody had told me to talk to a doctor here named Dr. Beal. And so I called and talked to his nurse, Janie Churton, and Janie said that Dr. Beal was very aggressive with his treatments and that she was sure that they could help David live a good life. And so he did. He responded very well to Dr. Beal, but he still had the, what do they call the syndrome? Even though David and I were both very, very pleased with Dr. Beal and his the things that he did to improve David's health, David did have the wasting syndrome, and at that time they didn't know anything to do for it, so he was constantly losing weight. And one of the things that I forgot to tell you was that when he was still when he went back from his class reunion to go back to New York and went into the hospital, he called his boss and told him that he had AIDS. When David went back to New York from his class reunion, his 10th year class reunion, he went into hospitals, and so he told his boss that he was sick and that he would like to come back to work as soon as possible. And when he went back to work, they asked him, his boss said that he said, "I wouldn't have had this happen to you, David, for anything, but since it has, then let's write an article and put our money where our mouth was in the first and show people how you really do need to treat HIV/AIDS people." And so David wrote another article in regard to having AIDS and the treatment that he was receiving from the place where he had worked, which was fabulous. As time went on, we learned more and more about how they really were concerned and what they did about it. But David came home. He called me on the 27th, said he wanted to come home, and he came home and stayed here at the house with me and my second husband for a while. And things went really well, but it was a real strain on my husband. And so we thought, and David wanted to go to an apartment of his own. So he was able to move into an apartment. He bought new furniture and was just really had a good life, even though he certainly was sick. I guess the essence of what I really want to tell you is not the ups and downs of the AIDS, but the love that was shown, the fact that we had a rain team come in, and they were just absolutely wonderful. They did everything and anything they could think of, and everything that I wanted done. All I had to do was just mention it. And towards the very last of David's life, they came and spent the night, half the night with David. They would stay until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. David's friend from college years came back, and while we managed to rent him an apartment, he would still come after work and spend the rest of the night with David. And I could go home and really get a good rest because I knew that people that loved David were with David. And David had a big Christmas party. He was a party kid anyway. And his brothers and sisters were all home, and they were all there to enjoy what part of his life that he could enjoy with them. Um, he was he still would joke, he still would laugh. He, um, and sometimes he was just so weak that he couldn't even get to and from the bathroom without help. Um, but things went along, and he planned for what he wanted to do when his life was no longer. And uh, I started, even at that time when he would be in the hospital, Dr. Beale would come in and ask me to go down and talk to other mothers. Uh, and I wasn't, people kept saying, "Oh, you're so strong." And I wasn't strong. Lots of times my going down and talking to other mothers simply consisted of walking in the room, and we held each other in our arms and cried. Um, I was, I had no handle on where it was going from where I was at that time. But as David planned his service, we had been going to the Unity Church here in Tulsa, and he wanted to have his service there. But David didn't want to have a regular funeral service where somebody that didn't know him got up and said flowery things about him. And he wanted his brother-in-law, Paul Englehart, to do the service for him. And they didn't feel like that they could let somebody else come in from a different denomination and do the service. So we called on the Methodist Church, Boston Avenue Methodist Church, where David had been raised and grew up through their programs. And his service was in the Rose Chapel, and people sent lots of flowers, and he had said for a long time that he wanted lots of flowers at his service, and that he didn't want funeral sprays. He wanted flowers, baskets of flowers. And so the man that did his flowers was, we got most of them through him, and he divided the flowers. If they came in with, several people sent $100 for flowers, and so he divided them into smaller baskets, and it looked like really a flower garden in the Rose Chapel. Debbie Campbell offered to sing at his service, and sung a cappella, and did a beautiful job. And but anyway, he also wanted a party for his friends after he had gone on, and so the rain team planned. We had it at Charles Padre's house and had a beautiful, lovely party that was it was just like what David would have liked to have had and attended if he'd still been with us. And I think I'm through.